Today we're going to look at lesson 9.2, which is about quadratic functions. We are going to be graphing quadratic functions today. So just a reminder, the graph of y equals ax squared plus bx plus c, where a does not equal 0, is what we consider a parabola. Remember, a parabola is a U-shaped graph. So we should always have graphs that end up looking like one of these two things. If we don't have that, we know that we made a mistake somewhere. So let's talk about the steps for graphing a parabola. First step is that we always want to identify the A, B, and C values. Okay, so once again, that comes from the y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. We're going to identify those values because then once we do, we are going to use A and B to find the axis of symmetry. So a reminder, we briefly talked about what that is, but the formula for this would be x equals negative b divided by 2a. So that's the equation that we'll use when we find the values of a and b. We're going to substitute it into that. So that's step number 1. Step number 2, we're going to put the axis of symmetry we're going to put that axis symmetry value, because it's an x value, in the middle of our table. And pick two numbers to the left and to the right. And then finally, in step number 3, we're going to find the 5 ordered pairs from the table. We're going to plot the points. We will also draw in the axis of symmetry. I abbreviate axis of symmetry as AOS. Okay, so axis of symmetry. So AOS. So anytime you see that abbreviation, axis of symmetry. So we're going to draw in the axis of symmetry and identify all important information. Okay, so let's take those 3 steps and let's start doing some practice problems. So here we have our first example. We're going to graph y equals 2x squared. So remember, our first step is to identify the a, the b, and the c values so that we can use a and b to do that equation, x equals negative b over 2a. So notice that in this problem, I don't see, because once again, remember, it's ax squared plus bx plus c. So normally there are 3 terms. Right now, I only see 1 term. So that means that you have to kind of think of it as, okay, well, then there's a 0x and there's a 0, because if I'm adding 0, I'm adding nothing onto it. Okay, so hopefully we're okay with noticing that because 2 is in front of the x squared, that's your a value. B, there isn't one, so that's 0. And your c value, there isn't one there either, so that's also 0. So we identified a, b, and c. And now we're going to create our axis of symmetry by doing x equals negative b over 2a. So we're going to do x equals negative, and then in parentheses, I'm going to substitute in the b, divided by 2 times I'm going to substitute in the a. So anytime I take a negative 0, well, anything times 0 is 0. 2 times 2 is 4. And 0 divided by 4 is 0. So that means that my axis of symmetry is x equals 0. Okay, so that was all step number 1. Step number 2, I'm going to put that value for the axis of symmetry in the middle of my table. So notice here's my table, and there are 5 spots for x's. So that's going to go in the third spot because that's in the middle. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick 2 values to the left and to the right of 0. So to the left of 0, if you think about a number line, would be negative numbers. So -1 and -2. If I think about numbers to the right of 0, that would be positive numbers. So 1 and 2. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these values, I'm going to substitute them into that equation, y equals 2x squared, and that's going to help me get my ordered pairs. Notice that my ordered pairs, we already know all the x values because we just put them in our table. So I know that we're going to have a -2, a -1, a 0, a 1, and a 2. We just had to figure out what the y values are. So we're going to have y equals, and so once again, I'm going to take whatever the x value is, substitute it in parentheses, and then quantity squared. So feel free to use a calculator to make sure you're doing order of operations correctly. Don't lose the parentheses. So if I square -2, I'm going to get +4, and 2 times 4 is 8. So you should have gotten that if you put it in your calculator. So -2, 8 is going to be one of my points. So I'm going to go ahead and plot that. Remember, we've got an x and a y axis where -2 is to the left and 8 is up here. So there is my point, -2, 8. Now I'm going to plug in -1. So order of operations, I'm going to square -1 and get +1. 2 times 1 is 2. So it looks like my next ordered pair is -1, 2. So I go 1 to the left and 2 up, and there's my point, -1, 2. Then I'm going to plug in 0. So in parentheses, I put 0 in. Well, notice that anything, when I square 0, I'm going to get 0, and then anything times 0 is 0. So it looks like 0, 0 is another ordered pair. So that is at the origin, so smack dab in the middle. Now I'm going to plug in 1. So order of operations, or you can carefully put it into your calculator. If I square 1, I'm going to get +1. 2 times 1 is 2. So it looks like we've got the ordered pair, 1, 2. So I went 1 to the right and 2 up. And then finally, if I plug in 2, order of operations, I square 2 and I get 4. And 2 times 4 is 8. So notice my ordered pair is 2, 8. I went 2 to the right and 8 up. Hopefully notice that there is kind of a coincidence here. The very first y value in my table matches the very last y value. Notice that the second number for y matches the fourth number for y. That is not a coincidence. Remember, parabolas are mirror images. We should be getting some of the same numbers. So notice that I should have points that are lined up horizontally from each other because we are forming a mirror image. Okay, so notice that there is my U-shaped parabola. Now, I also want you to draw in the axis of symmetry. This one might be a little bit hard to see drawing it in, but remember, x equals 0 is the axis of symmetry, which means that on the y-axis, because that's where x is 0, I do technically have my line. Notice how it would then go through the lowest point in this. So then we can kind of identify these. So we know that our axis of symmetry, because we got that from the first step, is x equals 0. Okay, notice that the vertex is the lowest point in this case because the graph is opening up, and that would be at 0, 0. Notice that your vertex will always be the middle ordered pair from your table. Because we have the graph open up, it is a minimum value, which once again is at the vertex, so the ordered pair in the middle of our table, so 0, 0. And notice that in this case, our y-intercept is also going to be at 0, 0, because remember, that is the only point that is touching the y-axis. So there is my graph. There's our table. There's us identifying all the key important information. Let's try another example. We want to graph y equals x squared minus 2x plus 3. So once again, first step is identifying our A, our B, and our C. So notice that the A value, if I don't see any number in front of the x squared, is really positive 1. The number in front of x, don't lose the signs. In this case, it is a negative 2. And then our C value is always going to be the number that does not have a variable, so that is 3. So there's A, B, and C. Remember, we need that to help identify the axis of symmetry, which is always x equals negative B over 2A. So I'm going to very carefully plug in my numbers. Now I got to have the negative sign, and then in parentheses, I'm going to plug in B, which is negative 2. That's all over 2 times our A value. So in parentheses, I'm going to put 1. Notice that my numerator has back-to-back negatives. So a negative times a negative makes that a positive 2 on the top. 2 times 1 is 2. Well, 2 divided by 2 is 1. So notice that my axis of symmetry is x equals 1. The number that I got for the axis of symmetry goes in the middle of my table. I pick numbers to the left and to the right. So what's to the left of 1? Well, smaller numbers would be 0, and then it starts heading towards negative, so negative 1. To the right of 1 would be more positives, so like 2 and 3. So I know that with my ordered pairs for my table, those are going to be the first numbers of my ordered pairs. So we're going to have a negative 1, a 0, a 1, a 2, and a 3. So now what we have to do is we have to plug in those numbers into the x's in our equation. And now notice this time there are several places for x. So we're going to have y equals, in parentheses, negative 1 squared minus 2 times, in parentheses, negative 1 plus 3. So very carefully, you can type that into your calculator, not losing any negative signs. So we should have squared negative 1 and gotten 1. Negative 2 times negative 1 is positive 2 plus 3. So we should have gotten the number 6. So negative 1, if I'm thinking x and y axis, negative 1's to the left, 6 is up. There's my point. If I was to plug in 0, so 0 quantity squared minus 2 times 0 plus 3. All of the terms with 0 are going to stay 0, and then I'm adding 3, so we'll have the ordered pair 0, 3. So 0 means I don't move left or right. 3 means I move up. I'm on the y-axis. If I plug in the number 1, I always plug it into the parentheses. So square 1, I get 1. Negative 2 times 1 is negative 2 plus 3. So when I add those, we should get the number 2. So the ordered pair 1, 2. So 1 to the right and 2 up. Plug in the number 2. So we'll have 2 quantity squared minus 2 times 2 plus 3. Well, 2 squared is 4. Negative 2 times 2 is negative 4 plus 3. We should have gotten the number 3. So 2 to the right, 3 up. And then finally, if I substitute in the number 3, very carefully, 3 squared is 9. Negative 2 times 3 is negative 6 plus 3. So that is going to get us, what? 9 minus 6 is 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. So 3 to the right, 6 up. Once again, notice the coincidence. We have 6 and 6 to start us off. We have 3 and 3 for the second and for the second to last term. Okay, that's not a coincidence there. That's how it should always be. So I'm going to connect those points to form my U, put my arrows. There's my graph. So then the last piece of information, draw in the axis of symmetry. Remember, it's going to always go through the vertex. So always, in this case, the highest or the lowest point. And now I can identify my pieces. So axis of symmetry, we actually got from step number 1, x equals 1. Remember, your vertex is always located in the middle of your table. So that's the ordered pair 1, 2. Because the graph is opening up, we have another minimum, which once again is at the vertex of 1, 2. My y-intercept is the point that is on the y-axis. Notice that it's also located in our table because the y-intercept is always 0, comma, a number. So in this case, it's 0, 3. And there's our graph. Let's take a look at one more example. Here we have y equals negative x squared plus 4. So notice that our A, our B, and our C has to get identified. A is in front of the x squared. Looks like that would be a negative, so negative 1. Notice that because our B term is always with x, and I don't see an x, that means that there's a 0 there. I don't have a B term. The C is going to be the number that doesn't have a variable, so 4. Okay, so I'm going to use that information to find the axis of symmetry. So x equals negative b over 2a. So negative, and then in parentheses, we'll plug in our b value, which is 0. And that's divided by 2 times, I'll plug in my negative 1. Well, negative times 0 will be 0 on the top. 2 times negative 1 is negative 2, but 0 divided by anything is 0. So it looks like x equals 0 is my axis of symmetry. So 0 gets to go in the middle of my table. And I need to pick values that are surrounding 0. So to the left would be some negatives. To the right would be some positives. So once again, those are going to be the numbers that are starting off my ordered pairs. So we'll have negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, and 2. Going to plug in my numbers then to find my y's. Now notice I have to be very careful here. We'll have a negative, and then in parentheses, we'll have negative 2 quantity squared, and then we'll add 4. So if you're plugging it into your calculator, be very, very careful with your negatives, with your parentheses. So I'm going to think order of operations. I'm going to square the negative 2, and that gets me 4, but then there's a negative on the outside, so it's negative 4. So negative 4 plus 4 is going to get me 0. So negative 2 means I move to the left. 0 means I stay there. When I plug in negative 1, I'll have my negative and then negative 1 squared plus 4. So once again, order of operations, I square negative 1 and I get positive 1, but there's still that negative on the outside. So we'll have negative 1 plus 4, which is then positive 3. So negative 1 to the left, 3 up, plot my point. When I plug in 0, we'll have a negative and then 0 squared plus 4. Well, 0 squared is 0 times the negative will still be 0. So 0 plus 4 gets me 4. So 0 means I don't move left or right. 4 means I move up. There's my point. When I plug in 1, I'll have negative and then 1 being squared plus 4. So we'll keep the negative on the outside. 1 squared is 1. And then when I add 4, we'll get 3. So 1 to the right, 3 up. And then when I plug in 2, we'll have negative and then 2 squared plus 4. So we'll keep the negative. 2 squared is 4. When I add 4, we'll get 0. So 2 to the right, and then don't move up or down. Notice that this time when I connect my points, my graph is opening down, which hopefully makes sense because my A value was negative. Okay, so if I identify the pieces, x is going to equal 0 for my axis of symmetry. So remember, when I draw it in, it's just going to be a little bit hard to see because it's going to be on the y-axis. But there's my axis of symmetry drawn in to my graph as well. Vertex is always located in the very middle of your table. So that would be the ordered pair 0, 4. My y-intercept is always going to be 0, comma, a number. In this case, the number would be C. So that's why this one is also 0, 4. Because the graph is opening down, we are at a maximum, which once again means that we're at 0, 4.